All right. My name is Katrina McCullough. I'm the founder of McCullough Management, your digital transformation leader. I am the project whisperer. We lead companies through digital transformation, business transformation, and workforce transformation. So adopting new technologies, taking a look at your business practices and best practices, and then workforce transformation. So hiring, recruiting, and training strong project team members. I would like to know who's here today. So if you could please put in the chat your name and the company that you work for and your title. We'll see who is here today. And I'm going to be asking you to participate in the chat throughout this. Welcome, Melissa. We have some of our own team members here today. All right. Welcome, Michelle, Layla. Hello, Amy. And welcome, Kenneth, Alex. All right, let's jump into it. So in order to have an organization that has strong, hello, Brianna, that has strong project management, that has digital transformation, you need to have strong project management. And in order to have strong project management, we want to define what that means. Great project management has these 5 pillars. So these are 5 pillars that we have designated at McCullough Management, starting with a great project team, a culture of project management infrastructure and strategies. So that's really setting up your conduits of information and your hubs for project management, as well as requirements and testing. And I took those out separately because requirements and because those are the 2 places I have found outside of the others that projects fail the most. Is not strong requirements and not a strong testing plan. And of course, communication and change management. And there's 2 aspects of communication. There's those conduits of information within the project team themselves, and that's part of that project management infrastructure. And then there's communication with the broader audiences and overcoming the resistance to those changes, and that's communication and change management. Today, we're focusing on the first pillar, and that is the team. And if you're thinking, I bet the rest of these webinars are going to go through the rest of the pillars, you're right, they are. So the next webinar, and I'll put a link to that towards the end here, is culture. And that's actually creating a culture of strong project management. So that's the second step to it, having a strong project team, is having an organizational culture, as well as the project management infrastructure, requirements and testing, communication and change management. But there are 8 webinars this year. So the last 3 are the art of recruitment and staffing, the 7 pitfalls of project management. And then the last webinar is going to be putting all of these together. So we're going to dive going through tools and templates and strategies for each one of these pillars. The last one, we're going to put them comprehensively into one 1-hour webinar. That one might have to be 90 minutes. So why do we start with teams? Why is teams the first pillar? It is the most important pillar because a strong performing team can help you overcome nearly any obstacle. So even if you didn't have strong change management or strong communication, even if you didn't have a complete project infrastructure, I have seen amazing projects run on a simple spreadsheet before because they had very strong team members driving the project. Conversely, if you have everything in place, but you don't have a strong team, you can absolutely derail a project. It is the most important and the most fun part of project management. So when we define a project, and I think that's important to do, the project, just the definition of a project, it's got a fixed start, a fixed end, a fixed budget, a fixed scope, and a fixed timeline. Obviously, there's differences if you have a Agile or Scrum, but essentially there's a fixed body of work that you are doing. And there's a vision for that work. What are you trying to achieve and why? Essentially, what is going to be different when this project is over, and why do we want it to be that way? But then what's standing in the way of us getting there? So what is the problem and what is our solution? And that's what project teams come together on, is the problem. What is it that we are going to solve today? People love to solve a problem. People love a challenge. And then, of course, how will we know we've achieved that success? What is it going to look like? What are we going to be able to do? How are we measuring our ROI? That is so important. That is the base ingredient for forming your teams, because it's going to inform everything else that you are going to need when you begin forming a team. So we're going to define what a project team is, just so we're all aligned on this. And I don't know if anyone has ever worked on large scale software or web or digital projects, but this is a sample size of who might be on your teams, from your project sponsors to your project manager, change manager, your stakeholders, your subject matter experts, user experience designers, front-end developers, back-end developers, technical architects. I don't have the database administrator in here, graphic designers, content architects. So if you can put in the chat anyone that you, any roles that you feel like might be missing, or that you've worked with, that you've had, that you've been on. I would love to know who else you've worked with on teams. And the one thing this does not include is who these people report to. So very often in projects, many of these team members do not report to the same person, and almost none of them report to the project manager, because project managers have authority without, or excuse me, have responsibility without authority. So we will have your developers or your technical architects will often report to your director of technology and your CTO. Your designers might report to the creative director. Your project managers could report to the CTO. And then you have different managers over all of these team members. And so why does that matter? Because we're talking about wanting to get experts on your project, wanting to be able to secure their time, and wanting to be able to having the escalation and that chain of command in place when there are issues. Because whenever you have a project that is quote unquote failing or struggling, it's usually it's always a team member. There's always someone on the team that needs something. And we're going to go through what those are today. So now we're forming our team. We're going to talk about how you begin to form a team. And the reason why that's important is if you're going to go into a project that fails and you're going to try to assess how it's failing, why it's failing, who on the team might be an obstacle to the project's success, you need to know how to set up projects to begin with. It's important to know how to set up a strong project team so you can go in and identify where that project team might be, what aspect of forming that project team was not done as well as it should have been done. So I do have an icebreaker question for you, and I would love, I'm going to come out of here. If you could please use either your text or a chat feed, or just log into pollev.com, Katrina McCullough, or Katrina M311. Forgive me, I could not control that. But I would like to, in your experience, what's the one trait, if you had to distill it down to one trait that every successful project team must have? And because this is a word cloud, we do want it to be one word, please. If it's truly one word, if it's truly two words, put a little dash in between. Coordination, absolutely. Collaboration. Do we have more? Communication. The C's, flexibility. Oh, I like that. Absolutely. Projects must be flexible. Trust, communication. Yep. That was a fun one. Communication is getting bigger and bigger. All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds. You'll have to forgive me. I have really bad allergies today. All right. Communication is the winner. We have flexibility, trust, collaboration, coordination. So now we're going to talk about what it means to build the right team. And there's a great quote from the movie Miracle with Kurt Russell about the hockey team that went to the Olympics in the 80s, the USA hockey team. And as he's looking at players to build his team, he says, I'm not looking for the best players, I'm looking for the right players. And that is so important when you're building a project team, because again, you have a very fixed timeline and a very fixed scope. So you really do need a team of experts. So here's a formula for success. We're going to hire the right people for the right role. We're going to define and agree on roles and responsibilities. We're going to keep the work manageable and prioritized. We're going to make sure there's no competing projects. And then we're going to establish, as we said, those clear communication channels. So we're done. We can all go home. That's the end of this webinar. I'm just kidding. So if that's all it takes to run a good project teams, then why do so many projects struggle or fail? And it is because project managers, again, often have responsibility without authority. So hiring the right people for the right role is sometimes not within our is not within our purview. Sometimes we have to inherit existing team members. And it can be hard to remove people, or we don't have enough budget to hire the right people for the right roles. When we define and agree on roles and responsibilities, people won't stay in their lanes. People will disagree on responsibilities. Oh, someone put in attention to detail. Absolutely. In communication, I saw that. Keeping the work manageable and prioritized. Can I please get a yes in the chat if you've ever worked on a project where you had an outstanding team member, but because they were outstanding, they were on every project? And then establishing clear communication channels. I'm seeing some yeses every time. Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. Right? If you're that good, everyone wants you. And sometimes if you're that good, you can still get it all done. I've seen people pull off what I consider to be just a magic act on projects. And then you have to establish the clear communication channels. Not having clear conduits. I call it conduits of information. So where the information goes, and making sure that you're spoon feeding it to people. It's not enough to have it somewhere where they can go find it if they need it, because nobody wants to go find anything ever. We are going to talk about that in depth at the project management infrastructure webinar in May, because that is that project communication, that project hub and escalation and workflow paths is huge, and a webinar in and of itself. So now we're storming, right? So now we may not have the right people in the right roles.
No.
They're not sure what their roles and responsibilities are. They're not they're not sure what their roles and responsibilities are. They don't have enough time, or they don't exactly know what's going on because they're not catching the updates as they come through. And I want to pause here because I stopped on this one before, but I didn't talk about this. If anyone's familiar with this from the Project Management Institute in the PMBOK, the 5 stages of forming a project team is, of course, forming, where you form the teams, and then there's storming. And storming is when we just talked about people are stepping on each other's toes. People are not completing the work that they're supposed to do. People are confused about what they're doing. They're not aligned on a vision. They're not aligned on what problem they're supposed to be solving. And they're like misaligned gears, and they're getting stuck. Norming is when everyone now understands what they're supposed to be doing, and they come to work every day knowing what's expected of them, and they're doing that job together. Performing is when you're moving as a unit. There is synergy together. You are in a flow, and that is the most magical time to be on a project. Being on a performing project team can change your life. can change the trajectory of your career. It's huge for personal growth. So focusing now back on storming. Now our team is storming. We don't have the right people in the right roles. They're misaligned. Can anyone tell me in the chat just yes if you've ever been on a storming team and how that might have felt? It's hard to want to come to work every day because you don't feel valued. You know you're not being listened to. You are oftentimes you know that the project might not be successful, and no one wants to work on a project that has that feeling. You're missing deadlines. You have low quality deliverables. Your budget goes up. You have demoralized team members. There's a lot of rework. There's project scope creep or a lack of focus. And then you have failure to achieve your objectives. Essentially, the projects fail. Yes. On-site offshore coordination. That is huge. Everything is always a battle. It was disappointing and frustrating. The project failed. Yeah. And I don't want to say that those necessarily can hinder your career, but if being on a performing team propels it forward, being on a failing project and part of a storming project team can actually make you feel stuck in place. So this was one of the ones that came up, was trust. And trust really is one of the key ingredients in a high-performing project team. We had coordination, communication, flexibility. All of that comes with trust. And I really liked this graphic on trust and how they broke it into two components, competency and character. Competency is what we're going to talk about today in depth. You have to be the right person. You have to have the right people in the role if you're going to have a successful project team. They have to be an expert in either the technology or the business. You cannot have someone on a project team that is not an expert in either of those. And you need a project team where you have experts in both. They don't always have to be the same person, but you need a mix of an expert in the technology and an expert in the business side on digital projects. And then you want that culture and that character. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the next webinar in March. A lot more of those cultural characteristics that really come from the organization as a whole, and making sure that you are bringing in people that embody those same cultural characteristics. But first, we have to make sure they're good at their job. So here's the steps to forming a team. The first two are pretty standard. Most everyone knows that when you're assessing the work, what is it we're trying to do? We have a work breakdown structure that we're going to put into a project plan. We're going to assess what type of role that needs to be. Is that a business systems analyst, a front-end developer, a back-end developer, a database administrator? Is that a QA person, a graphic designer? Who needs to do that? And then who on your team you have access to do that work? And if you don't have access to someone on there, what type of role do you want to hire, and how are you going to do that? And what else, what key characteristics and skills do they need to have? Once you've identified those team members, you need to assess their workload and competing priorities. Now, these are kind of a given, but I have gone to organizations that hadn't even done step 1 and 2 right. They did not even, I worked at one organization that did not know what a business system analyst was or what they did on projects. I've worked for organizations that did not have dedicated training. I've worked on organizations that tried to combine front and back end development, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Or they had one project manager for everything or one developer for everything. And that's the assessing the workload and competing priorities. You know, if you have a strong developer, what other projects are they working on? Are they also doing production? Are they doing, the production work? And at what hours a day are they doing that? The next ones I find are less common and also are huge, because you need to outline competencies and gaps. Are they strong in the technology? Are they strong in the business? What what expertise might they be lacking? And how are you going to pair that up with someone? Is that someone you need to hire in addition? Do you need to divide and delegate? And then every single one of your team members has strengths and weaknesses, every single one. And that doesn't mean we take them off the project if their weaknesses are, if they have weaknesses, because we all have weaknesses. But it means you need to actually have them in mind. Think of like a baseball card for every single one of your team members. Does someone overestimate everything? Okay, well, you need to kind of work that into your project plan, because someone who says something's going to take 5 months when it only takes 2 is actually not helpful on a project. People like to over promise, or under promise and over deliver. Sometimes that's actually really hard when you're trying to manage timelines and people's work. Sometimes you have someone who's a very, very, very strong developer, but really not good in documentation. Do you take them off your project, or do you pair them with your business systems analyst to help them with that, or perhaps the project coordinator to help them with that? But you need to identify what those strengths and weaknesses are with your team of experts. And then you need to complete the roles and responsibilities matrix, the RACI diagram, and we're going to talk about that here. Can you put in the chat if anyone's done a RACI diagram before? Yes or no? And I love doing those because they can really help bring conflicts to the surface. And that is okay, because projects are not conflict free. They're never going to be conflict free. That's sometimes what makes them so fun. Conflict resolution needs to be one of those core cultural aspects of it. The goal is to surface them and work through them, not to avoid them. We got into chats. Yes, it was disappointing. Oh, yes, yes. All right, we have it. Oh, good. You're going to get to see your first RACI diagram. I'm excited for that. All right. So how do you assess team availability? And these go from simplest to, potentially the more, not necessarily complex, but the more in depth. So you can assess your team's bandwidth and availability using a simple Google Sheet. And I am going to send you these first two here. I can show you. I'm still old school and I still love Microsoft Project. I know it's not everyone's favorite. And that's, I know people sometimes like the newer, more robust products. When I just need to find a simple, quick way to outline, Microsoft Project is still one of my go-tos to this day. Of course, there's Smartsheets, Monday.com, Jira, and there where you can put in all of the projects and the day-to-day work and the percentage that your team is working on. So I do have this one here. I'm going to give credit where credit is due to Hello Time, but this is just a really simple way. If you just take all of the people who might be working on your project, and the idea is they're a 1.0 FTE, right? 1.0 means 1 8-hour day. And you just put in their projects from start to finish and what percentage they're working on that. Is it a couple hours a week? And then you just check for where it's over 1.0. If it's over 1.0, that's something that you're going to need to figure out. Do you need to bring in a new team member? Do you need to spread this out? Sometimes it's just a matter of there's 2 weeks or a couple weeks a year where, it might be the year-end close, or it might be the start of an academic session, or it might be something that they're going to have to work less on your project and more on something else. And I'll be sending you this. The other thing you can do, and this is an MS project, but you can do the same thing in Smartsheets or in Google, is you have your project and you put in all of the tasks. And then down at the bottom, you can just add at the bottom other things that that those team members might be working on and what percentage. And I really want to challenge people to not just think of it as a percentage. Oh, it's about 4 hours a week, and this is about 10 hours a week. When you're doing this, it is much more helpful to actually box out a person's time. One of the banes of my existence on projects is when someone's like, we're going to work 50-50, 50-50 on production and support, 50-50 on the project. Okay, that is very hard to measure on a daily basis. What works infinitely better is if you're saying from 8 to 12 every day is project work, And then from 1 to 4:30 or 5 is going to be production support work. Or Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm dedicated to the project 8 hours a day. It's something like that where it's a fixed time and everyone understands that, and there's clear communication around those boundaries. And then it's really easy in project to just see who this little red guy here, or little red person, means that person's over allocated. And you can very quickly go to the resource usage sheet and see where people are over allocated. And then it's really simple to say, okay, well, here's how we're going to do this then. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're going to work on this. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you can go in here and play with this. So these are very, very simple tools to just get a very clear picture on who on your team is allocated to what and who might be over allocated, and then what you're planning on doing for that. I did want to show you here that this is, I do have asterisks next to all of these. I don't typically do that, but I did that today because I wanted to share something. You'll see how I'm going to continue using that. And I saw something come in the chat. Amy Voorhees. Amy, thank you so much for that. You're actually reminding me of something. At the very end, I'm going to go and answer all the questions at the end. So I will grab that one. We'll have a Q&A period at the end because it's different for different projects. So we can jump into that. That's a great question. And going forward, I forgot to do the admin. If you can put a Q : and then your question, don't worry about that one though. Going forward, if you have a question, that way it'll be really easy for me to scroll through the chat at the end and find those. Okay, so now we have our RACI diagram. So this is our roles and responsibilities. Responsible means I'm the person doing the work. Whoever's responsible is the person who has to write the document or, usually their documents, complete the deliverable. Accountable means I'm the person who is going to approve it. Consulted means I'm not the person who's writing it, but it can't be sent for approval until I have given my until my feedback has been incorporated in it. And then finally, we have sorry, I've got all these things covering my thing here. We have informed. So that's the person who doesn't need to be consulted on it, but they do need to know what's happening with it. And then you want to group by, you want to make sure that you're grouping these. So you're grouping the columns at the top by the teams. So whether that's project leadership or whether it's the project team, you might have your IT department, you might have your training team, whatever it is, you've got your team there. And then you want to group the rows by either phases or activity type. So, you might have everything when it comes to integration deliverables or technical deliverables, or you might have them by phases: planning, discovery, design, build, just so it's easy to find and you can collapse them when you're through with them. And then best practices for completion. Number 1, do not give a blank RACI diagram to your team members. It is cumbersome and hard to get through and people get confused. So it is important that the PM and or a small task force takes their first take at who they feel should be responsible or consulted or informed and who has final approval for those. Then you can send them to your team, but you want to schedule a meeting and you want to do all of it together in a meeting, even if it takes 1 or 2 meetings. Can anyone say yes if you've ever been in a RACI diagram meeting that got a little contentious? I have been in meetings where people were really confused why they weren't responsible for certain things, or the opposite, where they were like, I don't want to do it. That's not my job. I had a manager once who kept saying, I don't need to approve that. And I kept having to say, you really do, though. It really is your job to approve that. It is important. People were insisting that they need to be consulted on everything. And then some people who need to be informed, and they're like, I don't care. Why am I here again? what am I doing here? And you're like, well, it impacts you. It's important. You need to be here. So it's important that you let people know when you send out your first draft that this is not meant to be insulting. It was just a first draft. And the whole point of this was to have those conversations. The point of the RACI diagram is to actually, of course, it's to actually outline the roles and responsibilities, but it's to surface those conflicts ahead of time in a moderated, mediated team environment, keeping it light, keeping it optimistic, letting everyone know, and ensuring that at the end of this, this becomes your source of truth. So when things aren't going the way they should be going, you can come back here and identify that we agreed this was your job and you were supposed to approve it. The other thing that I add to mine is I add an S sometimes for supported, because sometimes these like a project charter can be so much work that maybe you have two people working on it. Maybe one person's ultimately responsible for it, but maybe you have a project coordinator who's taking different pieces of it, or maybe you have a training manager who's going to write out their part of the training side of things. So you might just put in, if they're actually not just consulting on it, but taking a piece of it, you can add an S for supported. And so the reason why, the reason why I put those asterisks in that MS project is because those were everything that were designated a deliverable. And so then it was really easy for me to grab those and put them in my RACI diagram. So this is a one-to-one with MS project, but taking out meetings and taking out other things, and then and I will send you the link to this so you will have this, and then being able to go through. Now, RACI diagrams don't need to include every single member of your team. I was on a 70-person team. That would have been very hard for me to have put all of that in one RACI diagram. So you can do sub-RACI diagrams as well. So if in design there happens to be a lot of documentation that is sub-documentation of that, you can create a supplementary RACI diagram just for those, just for some of those sub-project items. But this is kind of your overall, your project team, your design team, your IT team, the business or the functional folks, training. You could put on change management there, although I had change management as part of the project team. If there's any work stream leads. And of course, please use names. I use titles on this to keep it generic, but it really is more helpful if you actually use the person's name when you're doing it for your specific project. And once we have all of that outlined, we do want to make sure we're focusing on communication. Again, I'm going to talk about that in our third webinar in great detail, but here are just, you need to make it consistent. If you're going to send a newsletter once a month, send it once a month. If you're sending out your digest once a week, send it the same day every week. Keep it simple. People do not need to know everything that's happening on the project. You do have to learn to bubble up those top 3 to 5 things that are important in the moment. They need to know what they're supposed to do with the information that they're getting. And then you have to spoon feed it to people. I was trying to think of a more clever word than spoon feed, but really that just says what it says. You have to spoon feed it to people. You cannot expect people to go get it. You have to deliver it directly to them. And then you just repeat that over and over and over again, every day, every week, every month of your project. And now we're norming. Now we're coming together. Now we have people who are good at the job that they're supposed to do. And if there's aspects of them that, they're not as good at, we're figuring out how to bridge those gaps. We're starting to, we've got our RACI diagram. We've surfaced the conflicts. We're worked through them. So now we're actually starting. Now we come every day, we show up, we do our jobs, and we're feeling pretty good about the work that we're doing. Okay, so that's how you build a project team. Now we're going to talk about if you come into a project, someone's brought you in and they're like, it's not going well. We need help. How would you go in and help? So one of the first ways to go in is you assess your project documentation. Project documentation is a story. It's storytelling. Project management overall is storytelling. And there are so many ways you can go in and start to see where on your projects things are not going the way they should and who is ultimately responsible for that. The important thing to remember, though, is never to assume. So you need to gather multiple pieces of evidence before you start outlining who it is on your team that might be the obstacle. And so you want to stay objective and you want to let the data speak for itself. And we're going to talk about quantitative data and qualitative data. So this is quantitative data right here. So this And I'm going to show you project plans, bug list, defect tracking, your change management plan, your requirements documentation, your test scripts. If you're on a project that has and that you're collecting surveys and feedback, chances are, if you're on a project that's failing, they're not doing this. But if they do, those are good ways to jump into it. So we're going to show a couple of examples here. And first, I know you can't see that one, so I'm just going to show you here. All right. If you were to come here, you're new on a project, and you were to come here and you were to look at so there's your bug list. So we're in testing and we're trying to track the bugs, and we have 4 developers working on the project. In the chat here, tell me who you think you might want to talk to. What stands out here as something that's presenting a risk to you? I'll give you a hint. There's 2. Anybody? Yes, Melissa, thank you. Developer C, look at how many of those are reopened. Why? Okay, so you've got a developer with an inordinately large amount of reopened bugs. So who could that actually be? Obviously, it could be that the developer is just not good, but what else could it be? This is why we want to stay objective until we have all of it could be the tester. It could be that they don't understand testing and they're confused. I once had a developer who didn't test his own bug fixes. He just passed them on to the QA person. And he said, well, it takes a long time to test it. It's better if they test it. And I had to explain, well, you have to submit that it's done. The QA person has to open it, refresh themselves on what the bug was, then test it. They're going to think they're crazy for a minute because it's still broken and they're confused why you would have submitted it. So they think they're doing something wrong. They finally figure out, no, it really is still broken. So then they resubmit it back to you. You have to then open it, remind yourself what you did, go back and look at your code again, go, oh, okay, I'm going to try fixing it again. It is so much faster to just check it and make sure that it's right the first time. That is an actual conversation that I had to have one. So yes, absolutely. The other one is developer D. Developer D has a lot more bugs than the other developers. And so why might that be? Well, it could just be the developer is not very good at it. It could be the business systems analyst. Maybe they didn't actually write the requirements correctly. And that's why there's so many bugs here. It could be the tester. It could be that they're not understanding and they keep logging bugs that are just training issues, or just they don't have the right role and permission set up. So you don't want to necessarily just say, oh, it's the developer. Now you need to go deeper into that. And similarly, if we were to look at this, defects by the different departments, eesh, what happened in payroll? But again, you don't want to assume anything. It could be that payroll, first of all, it could be that payroll is just huge and there's just more testing that needs to be done. It could be that the business systems analyst didn't capture things correctly. It could be that the developer didn't develop it correctly. It could be, again, issues with the testers or the SMEs or the end users. But you definitely want to do your due diligence on what happened in payroll. So that's one. Another thing you can do is by just looking at the project plan. So obviously here, this project plan is fake. We're not already in April or June of 2025. So I just highlighted these. So in the project plan, we're going to pretend like these are delayed. So we're in business requirements. We're only 50%, 25%, 10%. So I would like in the chat for someone to throw out which role or which roles you would start looking into. What's happening here? Why is this delayed? What's falling behind? Who might be responsible for that? It's not a trick question. Right. Those in the resources. Your analyst. It could be your analyst. Who's not in the resources is your subject matter expert or your business. So it could be that your analyst is falling behind. Could be your analyst it could be that your subject matter experts are not making it to the meetings, or it could be that your business systems analyst is actually very good at documentation, but they're really not good at meeting facilitation. So when they're in meetings, everyone's like a rubber ball in a room bouncing around, and it's hard to just get it on paper. And so they're falling behind. We had one subject matter expert, and it was very challenging to keep her on task. So we had to start changing the way that we did things. Could also be that the project plan hasn't been updated and that these are just inaccurate. So that's the other thing to make sure is maybe the project manager isn't actually keeping the project documentation up to date. So you want to make sure that your project documentation you want to make sure that you're following up on that. Also, for subject matter experts, it could just be that they don't have enough time or they don't feel confident giving all of the requirements. And that goes back to culture and working with their managers and trying to make sure that they understand that this project is really reliant on them sitting there and giving those requirements to the business systems analyst. So sometimes that's more of an issue of working with their manager. So that's the quantitative. I'm going to skip some of these in the interest of time. And then there's the qualitative. So now we're going to talk to our team members. Of course, we're going to do one-on-ones with every team member, and we're going to ask them, this is a list of questions. So what is your role in relation to others on your team? And I will tell you, I didn't mention this at first, I would do the quantitative research first. Go through all your project documentation before you meet with the team, so you actually have some foundational information to pair these questions against. So what is your role in relation to others on your team? Show me what deliverables you're responsible for. When are they due? What or who are you dependent on? And then what are you waiting for? These are kind of similar questions, but this might be what you're dependent on, kind of the project overall. This is right now, you aren't able to do something because you're waiting on something from someone else, from a department or from a person. And then I love these questions. Who do you count on most? Who's your go-to here? Who's the person? Because it's important not to just outline, the obstacles on a project, but also who the strong team members are on the project. And then who are you waiting on the most? Who are you consistently waiting on the most? So if you think about that developer D and how he had the most bugs and he had so many, or he or she had so many in progress, if you interviewed enough team members and they kept saying, oh gosh, developer D it's just tough. Well, okay, now you have quantitative and qualitative data. Now you can put together, now you have your baseball card on this person where you're like, wow. So that's something I need to think about. If someone says, we absolutely love our business systems analyst, but our SME is a wreck. Well, now you think back to that project plan. Okay, you need to provide more support to that subject matter expert and that business systems analyst to try to bridge the gap of those falling behind. And how do we bridge the gaps? We have to figure out what it is about that person that is causing the obstacle. First of all, is it an expertise issue? Are they actually in the right role? And I've gone into projects that were failing, and sure enough, one of the developers wasn't actually strong in the development language they'd been hired to do. And they had been able to sort of create enough chaos that people couldn't pinpoint it. And we had to replace her. So is it just a training issue? If they're not strong enough, maybe there's another lead developer and you want to have them work together more. Is it role misalignment? Do they just not know that that's their task to do, or are they stepping on other team members' tasks? Of course, is it a bandwidth issue? How many other things are they working on? And I found sometimes it's actually harder to identify when you're talking to people, because people are like, no, it's fine. I've got, sometimes people don't want to say they're working on too much. So you really have to outline every single thing that they're doing. And to Amy's question, what other meetings that they're on, what other responsibilities they have within the organization that's cutting into their time per day. And then, of course, the communication. Are they just falling behind on what's expected of them? Have things changed and they didn't know things have changed? So they're working in a direction that's now not in alignment with the course of the project. And that has absolutely happened. Okay, so I want you to take a second and I want you to think in your head. You've probably already done this, of someone on your team, either a current project that you're on right now or a project on the past that was one of those obstacles for you. And I don't want you, just close your eyes. They're going to come right to the front of your head. And don't try to think of someone else, because if they came to the front of your head, you have a lot of emotions from there. You can already picture it. So I just want you to keep that person in your mind, because we're going to do a little exercise with that person. So who is it on your team that you felt, and don't put in the chat. You don't have to tell us who it was. That you felt was really an obstacle and a thorn in your side. Okay. So now what do you do? So now gosh, it's developer D. This person's just really a pain. So you're going to let the data and your solution speak for themselves. I don't like saying keep emotions out of it. I love emotions, and I think emotions are fine, and everyone has emotions, and it's those emotions, that passion for your projects, for the transformation that you want for your clients, or for what it's going to mean for your department. But you need the data to back that up. So when you're presenting it, you want to aggregate your qualitative and quantitative data, and you want to provide 1 to 3 or 4 recommendations in priority order to the appropriate manager. So you're going to determine what that escalation path is. We're going to talk about that during the infrastructure and webinar, but you're going to have that in place. And so you're going to go and you're going to put them in priority order. So the first one should be the one you really want to have happen, with the risks and the benefits of each, the pros and the cons. But that really needs to be a collaborative discussion with management, because they know things that you may not know. So they might know that that person's already put in a 2-week notice, or that they were already planning on putting them on another project, or they're already planning on hiring someone else, or they might know something politically that's happening. So you let that be a very open discussion. So what you're not providing is, this is what we have to do. What you're providing is, here are my solutions. So you're not starting from scratch. Now, what else might we do with this? And ideally, you're leaving that meeting with a plan in place. We're going to do more training. We're going to replace that person. We're going to take them. We're going to take them off another project. We're going to change the timeline of our project a little bit to accommodate. You want to have a plan in place. If you're met with a roadblock to management, we're going to talk a lot about that in culture, because then you don't have a culture of project management. So if you have managers who basically say, I'm sorry, that's tough, deal with it. Well, now you have to go back and try to figure out how you're going to work around that person. And I have had to do that. And I have had other team members, and that does lower morale. But there's a way to keep people up and excited. There's a way that you can say, yes, I'm going to take some of their work away from them, because it's not their weaknesses are their weaknesses. And we're going to divide and delegate that among other people, or I'm going to pair that person with someone. I'm going to bridge the gap. But that's okay, because we're all part of this amazing project. We are all solving this problem together. We can still be a high performing team. And this is still career growth for you. This is still, personal growth and career trajectory growth for you. Even if there's one person that we sort of have to project manage around on a project. So a shared challenge transforms differences into strengths. You can take people from different backgrounds. You can put them on a project, give them that problem to solve, and watch absolute magic happen. And as you're doing that, you're building the trust. So trust really, we've talked about actually forming the team. I was asked this once in an interview, like, how do you create trust on a team? The only way to create trust on a team is to listen to your team members, what they need, what's missing, what's in their way, what their obstacles are, say what you're going to do, and then do it. And if you're not able to do it, you tried and something came up and there was another obstacle, you're going to bring back. You're either going to bring back, you're going to review what you did, or you're going to bring back what you tried and why it didn't work. And then you're going to listen, and then you're going to tell them what you're going to do next, and then you're going to do it. And you're moving a mountain a spoonful a day just by doing that for your team. And then you build real trust on your team. And there's more ways to do that. There's trust is more than just being able to do, like we're going to talk about culture in the next webinar, but it is so important that you actually tell your team what you're going to do, solicit their feedback, and then do it. And it's amazing how much your team starts to, and then help other members of your team do the same thing. It's not just the project manager that does that. You need to set up an environment for your team where everyone can do that. You set up the environments and that infrastructure and that culture where people are listening to each other, telling each other what they're going to do, doing it, and then soliciting feedback on it. And then you have trust, but you also have focus. You don't have people spinning. You have collaboration and respect, a positive environment. You have momentum now. You're building momentum, and momentum builds on itself. Momentum feeds itself, which can go either direction. You don't want momentum to go down the storming path. You want momentum to go through the performing path. And you've got innovation, and you've got creativity, and you've got out of the box thinking, and that's where all that flexibility comes in and collaboration comes in. And now you're performing. Now you're a unit. Now you're moving together in synergy, and it's magical. You're knocking it out of the park, and you're making the impossible possible every day, and it's fun. It's electric. So can you put in the chat, yes, if you've ever worked on a really strong performing team and how that felt? Yes, gratifying and exciting, fulfilling. All right. Trying to still fit this into an hour. So I want you to take just a minute now, and I want you to think about that person that you had, and I want you to think about what were their gaps. Was it an expertise issue? Did they have weaknesses that people were relying on them too heavily for? Was it a bandwidth issue? And what documentation that you had to support that, and how would you have bridged those gaps? Two solutions. It can't always be replace the person, even though sometimes we all wish we could. Sometimes you can't. So sometimes you have to figure out how could you have divided the work? Or was it just a matter of training? Or did you just have to move some of their projects around? What could you have done in order to kind of rebalance their time or time box them? All right, so we'll take just a minute now. I'm going to call on someone who wants to sit in the hot seat. All right. Can I call on someone? Would someone like to share? Would anyone like to sit in a hot seat? I'm happy to stop recording. All right. I can always come back to this, but I do want to open it up to questions too. So I had the one question. What percentage of time do you estimate for people for regular overhead and for meetings, email, etc.? So what I typically do, Amy, is I do a 6 hour workday and I account for roughly 10 hours a week of meetings, chit chat. That's what I've done in the past. Um, uh, um, or um, or just kind of putting them in. Like it's either like an hour a day or 2 hours a day. So you can go into project or any of that and change the working day from 8 hours to one of two ways. Either I change the working time to just 6 hours, which makes the work take longer, but that's more realistic. Or I just actually add those in. And so I'll add in kind of like meetings and I'll chunk that out to an hour or 2 hours a day. And so it kind of offsets and then I can rebalance the work that's going to be done. But historically, I've done a 6 hour, 6 to 6.5 hour workday for people because I often find truly getting 8 solid hours of work out of a person every day is not always realistic. All right. And if someone's thinking, well, what if there isn't sufficient project documentation? What if I can't look at the project documentation and actually um, and get a clear sense of where the obstacles might be on the project? Then it's probably the project manager. And you can call me. You can send me an email. Uh, then it's more around either training the project manager or bringing in someone with that specific expertise. So it may just not be that you have a strong enough project manager on your project. Okay, future webinars that are coming up, and I have the chat here. The next week we're going to talk about, or not next week, I'm sorry, in March, we're going to talk about culture. So building a culture of digital transformation through project management. And so again, talking about conflict resolution and transparency and collaboration and how that really needs to come from the top down and how sometimes executives themselves are the ones who really want change and they're the ones who actually stand in the way of it. So what we can do to really create a culture of innovation and transformation. And of course, we talked about the project management infrastructure, communication, and requirements testing. Any more questions? It's just open now if anyone has any questions. You can put them in the chat or you can come off mute. All right. I'm just going to hop over here. Thank you. I will send an email to everyone with my LinkedIn and website and email again. I appreciate all of you participating in this today. It was amazing to have you here. Thank you so much. Thank you. So nice to see everyone. Have a fantastic Wednesday. Bye, Kalyan. Nice to see you. Thank you.